Okay, this video is going to instruct you in some proper care and keeping of your paint palette for acrylic painting. So this is a brand new palette that I am going to open up and throw away the plastic because I don't need that, the cover here. Toss that away. And what I've got here is a paint palette with, it's got the circular wells in it for pouring different colors of paint or mixing paint, and in the center well here I have a large space for a large quantity of paint, or that's a really good place to stir some colors together as you're mixing them. And it's got a little bit of a little handle over here that you can hang the palette by, or I find that's a good place to reach when you go to open your palette. You kind of grip the bottom plastic white part and you pop it loose from the top clear lid, and it just comes off like that where the lid was removed, and you can snap it on, and if you press gently around the edges the lid is attached. And that's just due to a couple places where it lightly reaches over the edge. Now this is a wonderful brand new palette, but once your palette is in use, you're going to have colors in the different little circular divots. We call those wells. And this one here in my hand has some paint that was used and left over, and we actually have let it sit out overnight or as long as needed for the paint to dry. And when it's time to clean out your paint, I have found that with these clear, smooth non-stick palettes, it's easiest to usually just reach with your fingernail into the paint and peel it. Once you get it started, the paint is very easy to peel off, but sometimes it's a little stubborn at the beginning. Or sometimes if it is paint that's been sitting there for a long time. Here, let me try a different color. There we go. So here, this white, once I grab that edge up, I can usually just peel an entire little chunk of dried paint out, and that is due to the amazing qualities of acrylic paint. That acrylic means like plastic, and the acrylic paint, when it dries, is kind of plasticky. It's flexible but hard. And our paint palettes are smooth enough that when you reach under the edge of some of that acrylic paint, you can just pop loose that whole chunk. I found that this is one of the easier ways to clean a palette off if the layer is thick enough. If the paint layer is too thin, like say this area right here, it's usually harder to remove it, and you end up just sort of scraping or scratching the surface, which is one way that you can clean it, but it's not the most time efficient. I found actually that if you have a thin layer like here or like over here in this well where they used most of the paint, once it's dry, it's not actually going to hurt your colors at all if you were to pour more color straight on top of that. And the more layers you build up, the thicker the paint becomes, and eventually it reaches a point where you are able to reach into that layer and peel some of it, grasping the paint and lifting it right out of the well. Now, one thing about these palettes is the reason the paint is easy to peel off is because they're so smooth. Now, if I were to take my palette and try to use a sharp tool to scrape or peel the paint off, that is a huge no-no, because this scissor blade, if I start scratching at the paint, it's going to scratch the plastic palette, and it's going to leave texture, my palette won't be smooth, and in fact the paint is going to start sticking to it without having this wonderful quality of being peelable. So please do not ever use a sharp tool like a potter's needle or a scissor blade to try and remove the paint. Now we're very happy that this part, the underside, the plastic palette with the wells, is non-stick, but unfortunately for us, the clear plastic lid that you get is made of a different material, and the paint, it sticks to it, and it's not going to peel well. So like this one here that's in really bad condition, somebody actually mixed their paints on the lid. Please don't do that. We can't peel this paint off. Now it's just building up. You can't see through the lid, which is one of the nice qualities of being able to see the colors that you have and be able to identify your palette. This one, we can't see through it, and it's building up thick enough actually that if I were to shut this on top of my palette with some paint still in the palette, this might actually dip down into the paint and make the problem even worse. Now when you go to unsnap your lid from your palette, please be gentle. These lids are very thin and they're flimsy, and honestly they don't cost a whole lot, which is how we're able to afford a whole classroom set of it. If you aren't gentle when you do that peeling motion off of the palette, it's very easy to crack and rip these, especially as they've seen a lot of use. This palette right here has not been treated nicely, and you see that rip there, as well as over here it's ripped and torn and cracked, and that is, unfortunately for us, this is no longer usable. That I either need to try and repair it or just toss it, because the paint in our palette stays fresh with this lid because it's an airtight seal. If I have a crack in my lid, my palette is no longer airtight. Next up, I am going to have some paint that I'm going to fill in my wells, and I gotta show you a little tip, so just hold on one moment. I forgot my paint. Now with these paint palettes, these wells, if you want to put a color in there, a little paint tends to go a long way. So when you use our tubes of paint, just start with a little bit. You would be surprised by how far the paint goes. A little goes a long way. And usually you don't need very much paint unless you're painting a large area like this whole background, like a sky or a large forest, and you know you need one particular color. Unless you're mixing a lot of paint, a little goes a long way. Start with that. If you really need a lot, you can add a little more paint, but you gotta find a stopping point where this green paint, once it levels out, it's gonna fill that whole well, and it's pretty much flush. I only got a little bit of that paint on my finger. It's almost flush with the top edge of the palette. You need to stop before your paint is rising up, like bubbled or domed in the well, because I'm going to do a bad thing, a no-no. I'm breaking the rules that if I pour a lot of paint, too much, because I'm not paying attention, or I just squeeze the bottle too much and a lot of paint comes out, if the paint domes up over the well, it's going to start to overflow the well. It's going to be raised up, and watch what happens when I go to put my lid on. You see how when I put my palette lid on, it squeezed out all over the place. It made a mess. It's going to get paint in here. The paint's about to go over the edge and probably drip when I try to store it. This one over here, where I tried to stop while it was flush, it's just barely overfilled. You can see it has squished just a little bit under the lid. But now that I've got that red and I overfilled it, I've got a big mess. And it's all over the lid, which I just told you guys, don't get it all over the lid. When I took the lid off, it's dripping, it's going over the edge, it's a big mess. So just apply a little bit of paint at a time. Don't apply much pressure, and a little paint goes a long way. So now I gotta go take care of this paint palette, clean it up, wash it in the sink, get all this excess paint off so that I can continue to use it day to day and keep my paint fresh. At the end of the day, when I call cleanup time and it's time to stop our paintings, your cubby is where your palette is going to go, because you are responsible for your paint. We're going to hold you responsible for keeping your palette clean, and you will be held accountable by a little sticker on the back side of your palette. We're going to give you a little sticker to label the back of it, and I want you to write your first name, your last name, and your cubby number. And I've got red paint all over my hands, so don't overfill your wells. Now you can see why. First name, last name, cubby number. That way, if you forget to put this away at the end of the day, maybe you're distracted, or maybe you just leave it sitting out and it's a big mess, we're going to track down where it belongs, and we'll be able to return it to you or hold you accountable for a mess like this. Please take care of these. You're getting brand new palettes, and I think that you will find them very useful for the acrylic unit. Thank you very much.